My name is Naomi, and I am 34 years old. For years, my family ignored my success while secretly plotting to drain my bank accounts to fund my golden sister's lavish lifestyle. So when my overlooked younger brother finally graduated, I handed him the keys to a brand new house right in the middle of a fancy family dinner. My father's reaction was to scream that the money was supposed to be for her loans. Little did he know his greedy outburst was exactly what I needed before the federal agents waiting outside walked through the doors. If you have ever had a toxic family, demand your hard-earned money to cover up their golden child's epic failures, hit the like button and subscribe. Let me tell you how I personally orchestrated the downfall of my own parents and sent the FBI to my family dinner. The private dining room at the upscale steakhouse was suffocatingly warm. My parents, Harrison and Cynthia, had insisted on booking this extravagant venue to celebrate my younger brother Leo, graduating from college. At least that was the official excuse. In reality, they spent the entire first hour of the evening pretending Leo did not even exist. While Leo sat quietly in his slightly oversized suit eating his salad, my sister Brittany dominated every single conversation. They assumed I was a struggling worker, but I was actually a data strategy director who sold my app for millions. To them, I was the rebellious daughter kicked out at 18 for refusing medical school. My father Harrison completely ignored Leo's grueling dual degree. Whenever Leo tried to speak, my father would immediately cut him off to complain about the menu prices. He kept shooting pointed glances in my direction, heavily hinting that it was my duty to pick up the massive check. The dinner dragged on, filled with passive-aggressive comments from my mother, directed at Leo and his beautiful fiancée, Kendra. Kendra is a fierce African-American nurse who had just finished a grueling 12-hour shift to be here tonight. My mother kept making snide remarks about Kendra's scrubs and Leo's supposedly low-class degree. Kendra just held Leo's hand tightly under the table, refusing to let my mother's venom ruin his night. When the waiter cleared our plates, Brittany turned to me with a smug smile. "So, Naomi," she purred, her voice dripping with condescension. "Did you actually bring a graduation gift for Leo? Or are you just here for the free food?" My mother chimed in immediately, crossing her arms over her chest. "Yes, Naomi, it is time you stepped up. You really need to help your sister with some minor credit card bills. Family helps family after all, and Brittany needs the investment much more than you do." I smiled, a deadly, freezing smile that made the air in the room suddenly feel very cold. I reached into my designer leather bag, feeling the heavy weight of the items I had prepared exactly for this moment. I did not say a word as I pulled out a thick manila envelope and a heavy set of brass keys. I tossed them directly onto the center of the white tablecloth. They landed with a solid thud right next to Leo's plate. "Happy graduation, Leo," I said, my voice slicing through the quiet room. "It is a 3-bedroom house fully paid off in a trust entirely under your name." The entire private dining room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop as everyone stared at the envelope. Leo looked at me with wide, unblinking eyes, completely paralyzed by shock. Then the explosion happened. My father turned a violent shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive silk tie. He slammed his fist down onto the heavy wooden table so hard that the crystal water glasses violently rattled and spilled. "Are you insane?" he screamed, his face contorted with pure greedy rage. That money was supposed to pay off Brittany's loans. Before the echo of his shouting could even fade, my mother lunged across the table. Her eyes were wide with manic desperation as her manicured hands clawed through the air, trying to snatch the deed envelope right out from under Leo's nose. She almost knocked over a bottle of red wine in her frantic scramble to grab the documents, but she was not fast enough. Kendra moved with lightning speed. Without missing a single beat, Kendra reached out and forcefully slapped my mother's hand away. The smack echoed sharply in the small room. "Do not touch my husband's property," Kendra said, her voice absolute ice. She pulled the envelope safely into Leo's lap and positioned her body between him and my frantic mother. She stood her ground with a calm, terrifying strength. My mother recoiled, clutching her stinging hand against her chest. She looked at Kendra with absolute disgust, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. "How dare you speak to me that way, you ungrateful girl," she spat. "Leo went to some cheap local college. He does not deserve a whole house. Brittany is the one who went to an elite law school. She is the future of this family. She is the one who needs the investment, not a mechanic and a hospital worker. I watched them unravel right before my eyes. My mother was shaking with rage. My father was breathing heavily, and Brittany was staring at the keys with a look of pure, unadulterated envy. They had no idea that this was only the beginning. They had no idea about the massive web of financial fraud I had uncovered 3 weeks ago, and they certainly had no idea what was waiting for them just outside those restaurant doors. My brilliant, elaborate plan was completely flawless, and I was now finally ready to watch my extremely toxic parents lose absolutely everything they valued in this modern world forever. Exactly 3 weeks prior to this dinner, I was asleep in my San Francisco penthouse. The cool ocean breeze drifted through the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlooked the glittering city skyline. It was a quiet Tuesday night, and I had just successfully finalized the absolute most significant milestone of my professional life. After years of grinding through endless coding sessions, aggressively pitching to venture capitalists, and fighting my way up the tech ladder, I had finally sold my proprietary data analytics application to a major global tech conglomerate for a clean $4 million in cash. My bank accounts were overflowing. My future was entirely secure. I went to bed that night feeling a profound sense of peace, knowing my brutal sacrifices had paid off spectacularly. My toxic family back east assumed I was barely scraping by in some cramped apartment, but in reality I was resting comfortably at the absolute top of my industry. Then at exactly 2 in the morning, my phone vibrated sharply against the marble nightstand. It was not a text message from a friend or a late-night email from a corporate client. The screen illuminated the dark room with a push notification directly from Experian. It was a critical high-priority credit alert. I blinked against the harsh blue light, my brain slightly foggy from deep sleep. I grabbed the device and swiped open the application, expecting to see a minor balance fluctuation or a routine soft inquiry. Instead, my stomach completely dropped. A massive red warning banner flashed across the top of the mobile screen. My perfect, pristine credit score had suddenly plummeted by over 120 points. I sat bolt upright in my bed, my heart hammering violently against my ribs. I tapped frantically on the detailed credit report, scanning the long lines of financial data. There, under a section heavily labeled as severe negative accounts, was a private student loan. The outstanding principal balance was an astronomical $250,000. The status indicator blared in bright red text, explicitly marked as 90 days past due. I stared at the digital numbers, trying to force my analytical brain to comprehend the mathematically impossible data. I had aggressively paid off my modest state college loans years ago. I currently had absolutely zero debt. I carried no balances. Yet this massive financial anchor was securely fastened to my legal identity. The detailed report listed me not just as an associated party, but as the primary financial co-signer responsible for the entire $250,000. Sheer panic surged rapidly through my veins. Someone had stolen my legal identity to secure a massive fortune. I threw off the heavy duvet and sprinted down the hallway to my home office. I fired up my secure encrypted laptop and pulled up the detailed credit bureau files directly from the source. The fraudulent loan had been issued by a major private financial institution exactly 2 years ago. I immediately dialed the bank's 24-hour fraud department hotline. The automated voice system was a frustrating labyrinth of numerical prompts and robotic menus designed to test a caller's patience. I paced anxiously across the hardwood floors, gripping the phone tight enough to crack the screen. The hold music was a cheerful, smooth jazz tune that sounded violently out of place against my rising terror. Every single passing second felt like an agonizing eternity while I waited for a human being to rescue my financial standing. Finally, after 20 agonizing minutes, a human representative answered the line. He introduced himself as a senior fraud specialist. I forcefully verified my identity, reciting my date of birth, my current residential address, and my highly sensitive social security number. My voice remained remarkably steady, but my hands were shaking uncontrollably. I need to immediately report severe fraudulent activity on my credit profile, I told him firmly. There is a $250,000 loan incorrectly listed under my social security number. I never authorized this account. I never signed any legal paperwork. This is a severe stolen identity case. The representative calmly asked me to hold while he pulled up the specific loan origination documents. The heavy silence on the line stretched out tightly. I could hear the faint rhythmic clicking of his keyboard in the background. My mind raced quickly through a long list of potential suspects. A massive data breach at a former employer, a compromised corporate server, a stolen credit card scanner at a local coffee shop. I was a data strategy expert. I knew exactly how easily identities could be compromised and sold to the highest bidder on the dark web. Miss Naomi, the representative, finally said, his tone shifting to a careful, highly professional register. I am looking directly at the original origination file right now. This loan was executed digitally exactly 24 months ago. It is listed as a private educational and cost of living loan. The primary borrower on the account is Brittany. That specific name hit me like a brutal physical blow to the chest. I stopped pacing immediately. My entire body went completely rigid. The air in my spacious home office suddenly felt entirely too thin to breathe. Could you repeat that name? I asked, my voice dropping to a harsh, breathless whisper. The primary borrower is Brittany, the representative confirmed, reading the electronic file aloud. The funds were explicitly dispersed for law school tuition and associated living expenses. The digital file clearly indicates that you electronically signed the co-signer agreement using your exact social security number and a secondary email address. The high walls of my luxury penthouse seemed to instantly close in around me. A massive wave of nausea hit my stomach hard. It was not a random hacker operating in a foreign country. It was not a sophisticated dark web syndicate stealing data. It was my own blood. To secure a private loan of that incredible magnitude, without my physical presence, they needed far more than just a forged digital signature. They needed my exact social security number, my entire credit history report, and the correct answers to highly specific security questions that only a close family member would ever know. My parents had all of that private information securely stored in their old locked filing cabinets from when they legally claimed me as a dependent on their taxes over a decade ago. I tightly closed my eyes, leaning heavily against my solid desk. The scattered pieces snapped together with horrifying, absolute clarity. 2 years ago, Brittany was loudly complaining to anyone who would listen about her mounting law school debts and threatening to drop out if our parents did not fund her luxury lifestyle. My father, Harrison, had reached out to me briefly around that time, asking weirdly specific questions about my employment status and credit health, pretending he was just checking in as a concerned parent. I had proudly told him my credit was flawless. They maliciously used that exact information to weaponize my identity against me. They ruthlessly used my flawless financial standing to secure a massive private loan for their golden child, deliberately tying my financial ruin to her unearned success. And then they simply stopped paying it. They let the massive loan default, destroying my perfect credit score without a second thought, leaving me to face the severe legal and financial consequences while Brittany paraded around with her fake successful life. The sheer terrifying scale of the betrayal was paralyzing. They did not just steal money. They committed federal wire fraud and severe identity theft. They risked sending their own daughter to federal prison just to buy their favorite child more time to pretend she was a highly successful lawyer. Are you still there, Miss Naomi? The representative asked, gently pulling me back to reality. The panic that had gripped me just moments ago completely evaporated into the thin air. It was instantly replaced by a cold, highly mechanical fury. I was no longer the scared 18-year-old girl they had cruelly thrown out into the streets. I was a highly trained data director with unlimited financial resources and absolute technical superiority. They had foolishly left a massive digital footprint, and I knew exactly how to track it. I am still here, I replied, my voice completely devoid of any emotion. I need you to freeze this account immediately and send me every single digital access log associated with the origination of this loan. I am filing a federal report today. I hung up the phone and stared out at the dark San Francisco skyline. My family had declared absolute war on my livelihood, and they were entirely unaware that I possessed the exact weapons required to annihilate them. I did not sleep a single second for the rest of that night. I walked straight to my custom-built multi-monitor workstation and powered up my encrypted servers. My tears were completely gone, replaced by the highly focused hum of my high-speed processing units. In my line of work, data is the ultimate truth teller. It does not possess human emotions. It does not make excuses for toxic parents. It simply leaves an undeniable digital trail for anyone skilled enough to follow it. At 6 in the morning, as the sun began to rise over the bay, I sent a heavily worded legal demand to the private student loan provider. Acting as my own advocate, I cited specific federal financial regulations and demanded the immediate release of the raw metadata file associated with the loan origination. I required the time-stamped digital signature logs, the device identifiers, the media access control addresses, and the exact Internet Protocol addresses used to execute the master promissory note. Because I had initiated a formal fraud dispute under strict federal guidelines, their compliance department was legally obligated to provide the raw access logs to my secure portal without delay. By early afternoon, the heavily encrypted file arrived in my secure inbox. I downloaded the raw comma-separated values document and imported it directly into my proprietary data visualization software. The massive curved screens on my desk flooded with thousands of lines of raw code timestamps, browser user agents, and network routing information. For a normal person, this would look like an incomprehensible wall of text. For a data strategy director, it was a brightly lit map leading directly to the criminals who had breached my life. I quickly wrote a custom parsing Python script to isolate the exact moment the digital signature was applied to the cosigner agreement. My fingers flew across the mechanical keyboard, isolating the specific Internet Protocol address that had authorized the $250,000 transaction. I ran the captured sequence through a commercial geolocation database that I regularly used for advanced corporate analytics. I watched the tracking node bounce across the continental United States, mapping the digital hops from the loan servers all the way back to the end user. The bright red digital pin dropped onto the screen and zoomed in automatically. The map displayed a highly specific residential subdivision on the East Coast. It pinpointed a large, familiar colonial-style house sitting at the end of a quiet, manicured cul-de-sac. The address listed on the screen was the exact suburban home where I had grown up. The very same house where my father had kicked me out into the freezing cold 16 years ago. It was not a random coffee shop network or a public library connection. It was my parents' private residential internet service. But I needed absolute ironclad proof that tied the specific individuals to the device. Any good defense lawyer would claim the home network could have been hacked. I dug much deeper into the metadata logs, isolating the specific email address used for the account verification process. The email listed was a generic burner account carefully designed to look like it belonged to me. I opened a secure virtual private network and navigated to the email provider's login page. I typed in the fake address and intentionally triggered a password recovery request. The security system prompted me with a masked recovery phone number indicating where the two-factor authentication reset code would be sent. The screen displayed the last 4 digits of the recovery mobile number. They matched my father Harrison's personal cell phone perfectly. I sat back in my ergonomic desk chair, the heavy silence of the penthouse pressing against my ears. The true sinister nature of the betrayal finally locked into place with devastating precision. Brittany was certainly greedy and entitled, but she was far too technologically illiterate and lazy to orchestrate a sophisticated digital fraud scheme entirely on her own. This was a highly coordinated, premeditated attack. My parents had actively participated in every single step. My father had used his personal device to intercept the bank verification codes. My mother had likely provided my old tax documents containing my social security number from their locked metal filing cabinet in the study. They had all sat around that expensive mahogany dining table sipping fine wine and actively committed federal wire fraud to steal my financial identity. They willingly mortgaged my entire future just to buy their golden child a few more years of fake prestige and social status. The magnitude of the crime was breathtaking. They had committed severe felonies that carried mandatory minimum prison sentences under federal law. They knowingly risked completely destroying my life, assuming I would simply take the financial hit to protect their sacred family image once the truth came out. In that exact moment, the last remaining thread of daughterly affection I held for those people cleanly snapped. The wounded, overlooked scapegoat officially died, and the lethal analytical data director completely took over my mind. I began meticulously exporting every single piece of evidence. I took high-resolution screenshots of the geographic tracking data, the password recovery prompts, and the digital signature timestamps. I compiled the raw logs, the system routing data, and the IP verification into a massive secure digital vault. I organized the folders by date and time of the infraction, ensuring that no defense attorney could ever poke a hole in my digital chain of custody. I locked down my own credit files with impenetrable security freezes, preventing them from opening any secondary accounts in my name. The preparation was cold and utterly devoid of mercy. I was no longer dealing with a difficult family dynamic. I was dealing with hostile corporate thieves who had brazenly breached my security protocols. I poured a fresh cup of black coffee and began drafting an investigative dossier. I knew exactly what I had to do next. I needed to know exactly where that $250,000 went before I brought the heavy hammer of justice down on their entire existence. At 8 in the morning, I bypassed local law enforcement and placed a secure call to Detective Mitchell. He was an elite private corporate investigator I frequently retained for deep background checks on complex mergers and acquisitions. I did not need a beat cop who would take months to file a basic subpoena and shuffle papers around a messy desk. I needed a financial bloodhound who could track offshore wire transfers, hidden shell companies, and digital money laundering schemes in his sleep. I sent him the raw metadata logs, the forged loan origination documents, and a single clear directive. I told him to follow every single penny of that $250,000 and report back with a comprehensive breakdown of exactly where my stolen identity had been spent. Mitchell promised me an ironclad dossier within 48 hours. While Mitchell deployed his team of forensic accountants, I opened a new browser tab and navigated directly to Brittany's public social media profiles. I had blocked her accounts years ago to protect my own peace, but accessing them through a secure anonymous proxy was effortless. What I saw on her meticulously curated feed made my blood run entirely cold. Brittany had spent the last 2 years constructing the flawless aesthetic of a high-powered corporate attorney. Her page was an endless scrolling grid of sheer, unadulterated luxury and extreme arrogance. I clicked on a photo posted just 3 months after the fraudulent loan was executed. Brittany was posing on the sun-drenched deck of a private yacht off the coast of Milan, Italy, holding a crystal flute of vintage champagne. The caption read, "That late night studying finally pays off," with a smug hashtag about the grueling law school life. I scrolled further down, watching my stolen credit score physically manifest into luxury objects on my high-definition screen. There were perfectly filtered images of her unboxing a $10,000 Hermes bag. There were highly edited videos of her dining at Michelin-starred restaurants, ordering white truffles and imported caviar for her wealthy friends. She frequently posted mirror selfies from inside a massive luxury loft apartment featuring exposed brick walls and panoramic views of the beautiful downtown skyline. In every single post my parents left, fawning comments praising her incredible work ethic and her brilliant legal mind. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation. She was flaunting the direct proceeds of a federal felony to thousands of followers, while boldly lecturing her audience about the value of relentless hard work. Exactly 2 days later, a heavily encrypted zip file from Detective Mitchell dropped into my secure server. I decrypted the payload and opened the financial summary report. The astonishing truth staring back at me was far more pathetic and sinister than I had ever imagined. The entire $250,000 loan had absolutely nothing to do with legitimate educational expenses. Mitchell's team had legally obtained the university billing records and academic transcripts. Brittany had been academically dismissed from her private law school during her very second semester due to a catastrophically low grade point average. She had subsequently taken and failed the state bar exam 3 consecutive times. She possessed no legal degree, no license to practice, and zero prospects of ever working in a legitimate law firm. The detailed financial ledger provided by Mitchell showed exactly how they had burned through my stolen money. Every single transaction was perfectly documented, leaving zero room for any plausible deniability. The very first wire transfer authorized by my forged signature went straight to a high-end luxury car dealership in the suburbs. Brittany had put $40,000 down to lease a brand new custom white Porsche Macan. The premium leather seats and upgraded technology package alone cost more than Leo's entire college tuition. The exorbitant monthly payments were automatically deducted from a shadow bank account funded entirely by the fraudulent loan. Another $80,000 had been wired directly to a premium property management group to secure a 2-year prepaid lease on that spectacular downtown loft I had seen on her Instagram. The rest of the funds were systematically bled dry on luxury European vacations, designer clothing, and expensive cosmetic treatments. She was literally wearing my stolen financial security. But the absolute most disturbing part of the dossier was the deep financial dive Mitchell had done on my parents, Harrison and Cynthia. They were completely and utterly broke. Their pristine suburban image was a hollow, crumbling facade waiting to collapse. According to the property and tax records Mitchell uncovered, my parents were currently drowning under the crushing weight of multiple secondary and tertiary mortgages on their home. They had completely exhausted their retirement savings, trying to maintain their country club lifestyle and keep up appearances for their wealthy neighbors. The stolen loan was not just about buying Brittany nice things to make her happy. It was a desperate, highly calculated financial investment. My parents knew Brittany was an academic failure, but they also knew she was highly attractive and completely ruthless. They intentionally funded her fake lifestyle with my stolen identity so she could seamlessly infiltrate high society circles without raising any suspicion. They placed her in that luxury downtown loft and bought her that Porsche so she could rub elbows with wealthy senior partners and elite corporate executives. Their entire master plan was to use my flawless credit to buy Brittany enough time to trap a rich husband before the stolen money finally ran out. They literally viewed their golden child as a high-stakes financial asset, and they happily sacrificed my legal identity to fund the predatory operation. I sat in the quiet glow of my computer monitors, digesting the sheer sociopathy required to execute a scheme of this magnitude. They had sold my future to buy lottery tickets for their favorite daughter. My parents had built a fragile house of cards on top of a massive federal crime, and now the wind was finally starting to blow. I printed the entire dossier page by page, feeling the heavy weight of the premium paper in my hands. The evidence was absolute. The fraud was undeniably ironclad. I securely placed the devastating financial reports into a thick manila envelope. I now possessed the exact legal ammunition required to completely obliterate their entire reality. I just needed the perfect opportunity to pull the trigger. I carefully placed the devastating financial reports into the thick manila envelope and sealed it shut. The heavy adhesive felt like the final lock on my family's impending prison cell. Just as I set the dossier down on my sleek glass desk, my personal cell phone began to vibrate violently against the hard surface. I glanced down at the brightly illuminated screen and felt my entire body freeze for a fraction of a second. The caller identification clearly displayed a name I had not seen. Light up my device in exactly 8 agonizing months. It was Cynthia, my mother. I stared at the incoming call, letting it ring 3 times, while my analytical brain rapidly processed the statistical anomaly of this event. My parents had actively ignored my very existence since the day they threw me out. They never called to check on my well-being or ask about my career. They only ever initiated contact when they needed a convenient scapegoat to blame for their own miserable failures. To receive a call from Cynthia, right at the exact moment I uncovered their massive federal wire fraud, was not a random coincidence. It was a highly calculated move. I tapped the green button and accepted the call, pressing the phone to my ear. I kept my breathing perfectly shallow and controlled. Naomi, sweetheart, my mother's voice floated through the speaker. Her tone was sickeningly sweet, dripping with a thick layer of fake maternal affection that instantly made my skin crawl. It has been far too long, darling. Your father and I have missed you so incredibly much. The sheer audacity of her cheerful greeting was almost physically repulsive. I forced my vocal cords to relax, injecting a tone of mild, polite surprise into my response. "Hello, Mom," I replied, my voice completely smooth and devoid of the burning rage simmering just beneath my skin. "It certainly has been a long time. What is the occasion?" "Well," Cynthia continued, her voice taking on a manufactured tone of bright family excitement, "your younger brother Leo is finally graduating from college next week. We are hosting a very intimate private dinner at that upscale steakhouse downtown to celebrate his achievements. We really want our entire family together for this special milestone. It just would not be the same without our oldest daughter sitting at the table with us." I analyzed the blatant psychological manipulation unfolding in real time. My parents despised Leo almost as much as they despised me. They viewed his grueling work ethic and public college degree as an embarrassment to their fake high society image. Hosting an expensive dinner for him was entirely out of character. They were using my overlooked brother's genuine achievement as bait to lure me into a carefully constructed trap. "A graduation dinner for Leo," I said, maintaining my perfectly pleasant facade. "That sounds lovely. I am sure he is very proud of his dual degree." "Yes, yes, of course." Cynthia brushed past Leo's accomplishments rapidly, eager to pivot to the actual purpose of her call. "Oh, and darling, since we will all be in one place together, your father has a tiny little favor to ask of you. He is reorganizing some old financial files for our accountant, and there are just a few routine family tax documents from a couple of years ago that need a quick signature from you. It is nothing major at all. Just some boring administrative housekeeping to close out the fiscal year properly. You can sign them right before we order dessert." The trap snapped shut with a deafening metallic clang inside my mind. Routine family tax documents. The phrasing was so deliberately casual, so expertly crafted, to sound completely harmless. But my sophisticated, data-driven mind immediately translated the heavy underlying tension in her voice. They were not tax documents. They were looking to ambush me in a public setting surrounded by family, to pressure me into signing a retroactive consent form for the forged $250,000 loan. They needed my physical signature to legitimize the massive fraud they had committed 2 years ago. If they could manipulate me into signing a document admitting I knew about the loan and accepted responsibility for it, the federal authorities would have a much harder time pursuing wire fraud charges against them. They wanted to legally bind me to Brittany's fake luxury lifestyle so I could never report them. They wanted to ensure that if the bank came collecting, I would be the one forced to drain my accounts to pay for her imported caviar and her leased Porsche. I smiled a deadly, freezing smile into the empty penthouse office. I knew exactly how to play this game. "Of course, Mom," I replied, my voice radiating an artificial warmth that perfectly matched her own. "I would be absolutely happy to look at any documents Dad needs me to sign. Just let me know the time and the reservation name. I will absolutely be there." "Oh, wonderful, Naomi!" Cynthia breathed a highly audible sigh of relief. Her facade cracked just enough to reveal her desperate greed. "We are so excited to see you. Dress nicely, darling. We want to take plenty of family photographs." I ended the call and tossed the phone back onto my desk. The sheer evil of their master plan was staggering. They intended to legally enslave me to their debt while smiling for the camera. But a crucial piece of data was still missing. Why call me today? Why wait 2 years to secure the retroactive signature? Less than 5 minutes later, my phone rang again. It was Detective Mitchell calling on our secure encrypted line. "Naomi," Mitchell said, his gruff voice cutting straight to the chase. "I just flagged a massive security anomaly. I put a monitoring alert on your parents' network traffic when we started the investigation. Yesterday afternoon, they ran multiple amateur background checks on your legal name and your current corporate entities." "Why the sudden interest?" I asked, my eyes narrowing at the screen. "Because of a mail routing error," Mitchell explained. "A premier financial magazine just mailed out a heavy embossed congratulatory plaque regarding the $4 million buyout of your data analytics app. Because you never formally updated your residential address with that specific alumni publication. The package was delivered directly to your parents' suburban house yesterday morning. They illegally opened your mail, Naomi. They read the entire buyout summary. They know exactly how much your technology company sold for. They know you are a multimillionaire. I stood frozen in the center of my spacious home office as the final horrifying puzzle piece locked perfectly into place. They did not just want to cover up their tracks and avoid federal prison. They wanted to actively extort me. They saw my massive financial success not as an achievement to be celebrated, but as a giant overflowing piggy bank ready to be smashed open. They assumed that because I had been desperate for their love and approval my entire childhood, I would easily surrender my hard-earned wealth just to be allowed back into their toxic inner circle. They fully intended to blindside me at that graduation dinner, present me with the fraudulent loan documents, and demand that I pay off the entire $250,000 as a gesture of family loyalty. They thought I was the exact same weak, desperate girl they had kicked out into the freezing cold 16 years ago. They fundamentally failed to realize that the heat of their rejection had forged me into an absolute weapon. I thanked Mitchell and disconnected the call. The silence in my penthouse felt electric, charged with the pure kinetic energy of a looming execution. My family had explicitly chosen to play a high-stakes game of financial warfare against a woman who built data fortresses for a living. I walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows and looked down at the sprawling city below. I was going to attend that dinner. I was going to smile for their photographs. And then I was going to burn their entire fraudulent empire straight to the ground. I needed to call my attorney immediately. It was time to build an impenetrable legal shield around my wealth. I walked into the downtown offices of Davis and Associates at precisely 8 in the morning the very next day. Alexander Davis was a shark in a tailored suit, a highly specialized financial attorney who protected the assets of Silicon Valley elite. When I sat down in his glass-walled conference room overlooking the city, I did not waste a single second on pleasantries. I slid the thick dossier Detective Mitchell had compiled directly across the polished marble table. Davis opened it and read through the documentation in absolute silence. His sharp eyes scanned the geolocation logs, the forged signature timestamps, and the horrifying breakdown of Brittany's luxury spending spree. I explained the phone call from my mother and the intercepted mail regarding my $4 million buyout. They are setting a trap, I told him, my voice steady and completely devoid of panic. They want to use my younger brother's graduation dinner to ambush me. My mother mentioned some routine family tax documents that need my signature. I am entirely certain they plan to slide a retroactive consent form for this $250,000 loan under my nose. They want to blindside me, surrounded by the public pressure of family, and guilt me into signing away my financial freedom. Davis closed the folder and leaned back in his leather chair, intertwining his fingers. He looked at me with a mixture of professional disgust for my parents and deep respect for my analytical foresight. A retroactive consent form, or a post-factum ratification agreement, is a classic extortion tool in familial fraud cases, he explained smoothly. If they can manipulate you into physically signing a document acknowledging the loan, they can legally argue that you verbally authorized the transaction 2 years ago. It immediately shifts the liability from a federal wire fraud committed by them into a civil financial dispute over a legitimate co-signed debt. They know they committed a severe felony, Naomi. They are desperately trying to turn this into a binding civil contract so they can force you to pay off Brittany's Porsche and luxury loft with your new tech wealth. I felt a cold shiver run down my spine at the sheer calculating evil of their plan, but I kept my posture perfectly rigid. I am not signing anything, I stated firmly. But I know my parents. When they realize I will not sign the consent form, they will pivot to a scorched earth strategy. They will likely attempt to sue me for filial responsibility, claiming they sacrificed their own financial well-being to raise me. They might try to freeze my assets by filing an emergency injunction, claiming the tech buyout was built using family resources. I need you to make me completely bulletproof. I want an impenetrable legal fortress around every single penny of that $4 million. I want to ensure that even if they hire the most aggressive litigators in the country, they will not be able to touch a single cent. Davis smiled a razor-sharp grin that perfectly matched my own calculating energy. Let us build your fortress, he said, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him. We are going to immediately transfer your entire $4 million liquidity event out of your personal banking accounts and into a highly fortified corporate structure. We will establish a series of anonymous limited liability companies, completely shielding your legal identity from public asset searches. By utilizing states with aggressive privacy protections, we create a corporate veil that is virtually impossible for civil litigators to pierce. I watched closely as he mapped out the financial architecture on his legal pad. It was a beautiful display of defensive strategy that appealed directly to my data-driven brain. The primary holding company will be completely anonymous. Davis continued, his pen moving rapidly across the paper. That entity will then fund a secondary irrevocable blind trust. By structuring it as an irrevocable trust, you legally surrender direct ownership of the capital while remaining the sole beneficiary. This is the ultimate defensive maneuver. In the eyes of the law, you essentially own nothing on paper. Therefore, if your family attempts to sue you for emotional damages, filial support, or tries to force collection on that fraudulent loan, there are absolutely zero personal assets for them to attach a lien against. They cannot seize what you technically do not own. It was a brilliant, perfectly executed legal maneuver. My parents were relying on emotional manipulation and aggressive public pressure to steal my wealth. They were bringing guilt to a gunfight while I was quietly constructing an indestructible titanium vault. How fast can we execute the transfers? I asked, checking my watch. The graduation dinner is happening in exactly 48 hours. I need the capital completely locked down before I walk into that restaurant. Davis picked up his desk phone and buzzed his paralegal team. We will execute the wire transfers right now, he confirmed. By the time you leave this office today, your money will be completely ghosted from the traditional banking system. Your family could hire an army of forensic accountants, and they would only hit a solid brick wall of privacy statutes and protected trusts. You will be entirely untouchable. For the next 2 hours, I sat in that glass conference room, signing a mountain of complex legal documents. I transferred my real estate holdings, my investment portfolios, and the massive cash buyout from my data application into the blind trust. I watched the heavy black ink settle onto the pristine white paper, symbolizing my absolute severance from their financial control. With every stroke of my pen, I felt a profound, immense weight lifting off my shoulders. The irrevocable blind trust was the ultimate shield separating the wealthy, successful woman I had become from the vulnerable teenager they had ruthlessly discarded. My parents had spent my entire childhood holding their meager financial support over my head, using money as a weapon to control and demean me. They thought they could use that exact same weapon to chain me to Brittany's pathetic failures. They were completely wrong. As I handed the final signed trust agreement back to Davis, I felt a surge of pure, unadulterated power. My financial empire was now securely locked behind blast doors. I was fully protected from any civil lawsuits, frivolous claims, or extortion attempts. My parents might launch when their plan inevitably collapsed. The defensive perimeter was officially established. My assets were completely safe. Davis gathered the paperwork and extended his hand across the table. You are completely insulated, Naomi. Your wealth is secure. Now, what is your exact plan for the fraudulent loan they originated in your name? I shook his hand firmly, my eyes cold and entirely focused. I grabbed my designer bag and the thick dossier of hard evidence. Now that my money is legally protected, I replied, it is time to go on the absolute offensive. I am taking this folder directly to the federal authorities. I left Alexander Davis standing in his glass conference room and headed straight for the elevator. My next destination was not a local police precinct or a neighborhood watch station. $250,000 in stolen funds crossing state lines via digital networks elevated this situation far beyond a simple domestic dispute. This was a severe federal crime. I hailed a black car service and directed the driver to the Federal Bureau of Investigation field office in downtown San Francisco. Federal wire fraud is not a minor infraction that results in a gentle slap on the wrist. It carries mandatory minimum sentences and devastating financial penalties. By utilizing telecommunications to intentionally defraud a major financial institution and steal my legal identity, my parents and my sister had triggered massive federal jurisdiction. They operated under the incredibly arrogant assumption that their suburban respectability made them untouchable. But federal prosecutors do not care about country club memberships or expensive tailored suits. They care about raw data and undeniable paper trails. I walked through the heavy security doors of the federal building, passing through the metal detectors with absolute purpose. I had called ahead through a highly confidential contact Detective Mitchell provided, ensuring I bypassed the standard intake desk and went directly to the white-collar crime division. I was escorted down a long, sterile hallway into a stark, windowless interview room by Special Agent Thompson. I was a sharply dressed veteran investigator who specialized in dismantling complex financial crimes and severe identity theft syndicates. I sat across the cold metal table from Agent Thompson and opened my designer bag. I did not shed a single tear. I did not present myself as a weeping victim seeking emotional comfort or familial reconciliation. I operated purely as a data strategy director, delivering a perfectly packaged criminal indictment. I slid the thick manila folder across the table toward him. Inside were the raw metadata logs, the advanced geolocation tracking data, mapping the forged digital signature directly to my parents' residential internet protocol address, and the university transcripts proving Brittany's academic dismissal. I also included the comprehensive financial ledger Detective Mitchell had meticulously compiled, showing the exact routing numbers where the stolen money had been laundered to lease a white Porsche Macan and a luxury downtown loft. Agent Thompson spent 45 minutes reviewing the extensive dossier in absolute silence. He turned page after page, his eyes scanning the digital signature timestamps and the undeniable proof of the burner email account tied to my father's personal cell phone. When he finally looked up, his expression was a mix of stark professional astonishment and deep respect. He explicitly stated that most financial fraud victims bring chaotic emotional accusations built on hearsay. I had delivered a prosecution-ready package that left zero room for reasonable doubt. He confirmed that the evidence was absolutely ironclad. The deliberate theft of a Social Security number, combined with the electronic transmission of fraudulent loan documents, constituted multiple counts of aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. Each count carried a potential sentence of up to 20 years in federal prison. Hearing that massive legal penalty should have made a normal daughter hesitate. It should have sparked a tiny flame of familial guilt or a desperate biological desire to protect the people who gave her life. I felt absolutely nothing. There was zero remorse in my heart. They had gladly thrown me to the wolves when I was an 18-year-old girl struggling to survive. They had actively planned to legally enslave me to their massive debt just to maintain their pathetic illusion of wealth. I was not destroying my family. I was simply executing a highly controlled demolition of a toxic structure that had been rotting from the inside out for decades. They built the explosive device, and I was merely handing the detonator over to the federal government. Agent Thompson reached for his secure phone to begin drafting the immediate arrest warrants for Harrison, Cynthia, and Brittany. I held up my hand, stopping him before he could make the call. I have one specific tactical request, I told him, leaning forward slightly, putting my hands flat on the metal table. My parents and my sister are currently drowning in secondary mortgages and severe consumer debt. They have zero liquid assets left. If you send local police to their suburban home today, they will panic. If Brittany gets wind of a federal investigation at her luxury loft, she will absolutely run. They are desperate, cornered individuals, and that makes them unpredictable flight risks. Agent Thompson lowered the phone, his eyes narrowing as he listened to my strategic assessment. "What do you propose?" he asked, his tone indicating he was fully willing to hear my plan. I explained the upcoming graduation dinner for my brother Leo. I detailed how my parents had orchestrated the expensive dinner specifically to ambush me and extort my signature on a retroactive consent form. I told Agent Thompson that all three culprits would be sitting at the exact same table in a private dining room at a downtown steakhouse in exactly 48 hours. They will be completely relaxed, entirely off guard, and contained in one single room, I explained smoothly. It is the perfect opportunity to apprehend all three targets simultaneously, without any risk of evidence destruction or violent evasion. Furthermore, They intend to present me with the fraudulent loan documents at that dinner. That gives your team the unique opportunity to catch them actively attempting to further their extortion scheme in real time. Agent Thompson analyzed the strategic value of my request. It made perfect tactical sense. Executing the warrants in a controlled public environment minimized the risk of a dangerous standoff or a chaotic pursuit through residential neighborhoods. He agreed to coordinate directly with the local police department and the federal task force in their specific jurisdiction. They would position unmarked vehicles outside the restaurant and have plainclothes agents waiting in the lobby to secure the perimeter. The trap was officially set and the jaws were ready to snap shut. I thanked Agent Thompson and walked out of the federal building into the bright California sunlight. The heavy machinery of the United States justice system was now fully engaged and locked directly onto my parents. The days of me cowering in the shadows of my golden sister were officially over. My flight to the East Coast was scheduled for tomorrow morning. I needed to visit my brother Leo and his fiancée Kendra before the spectacular finale unfolded. I needed to see exactly what kind of life my parents had condemned him to while they funded Brittany's delusions. I hailed another car to take me to the airport, my mind already calculating the next critical move in this flawless operation. I touched down on this East Coast exactly 2 days before the scheduled graduation dinner. Instead of checking into my luxury hotel right away, I directed my hired driver to an address on the absolute opposite side of the city. The sleek black car navigated away from the glittering downtown high-rises and crossed into a neighborhood defined by cracked sidewalks, flickering streetlights, and heavy chain-link fences. This was where my younger brother Leo lived. The contrast between this crumbling urban decay and the pristine suburban cul-de-sac where my parents resided was jarring. But the comparison to Brittany's stolen reality was what truly made my blood boil. While my sister was lounging in a panoramic luxury loft, funded entirely by federal wire fraud, Leo was forced to survive in a forgotten corner of the city. I stepped out of the car and walked down a narrow concrete stairwell leading to a damp basement unit. The air smelled strongly of mildew and exhaust fumes from the busy street above. I knocked softly on the peeling paint of the wooden door. When no one answered, I tried the handle. It was unlocked, a risky habit in this neighborhood, but perhaps a sign of sheer exhaustion. I pushed the door open and stepped inside. The apartment was incredibly cramped, barely large enough to fit a small sofa and a modest dining table. The ceiling was oppressively low with exposed pipes running along the plaster. Yet despite the harsh poverty, the space was meticulously clean and organized with fierce pride. In the corner of the small living room, serving as a makeshift study area, I found Leo. He was slumped forward over a cheap particle board desk, completely fast asleep. He was still wearing his heavy grease-stained mechanic's uniform from the local auto shop. Scattered all around his resting head were thick, heavy textbooks for his dual degree in business and communications. His hands, resting limply on an open notebook, were calloused and covered in engine oil. The sheer physical toll of his daily existence was written in the dark circles under his closed eyes. My parents had effectively thrown him to the wolves, leaving him to drown in the grueling cycle of minimum wage labor, while they actively purchased a luxury Porsche for his lazy sister. Before I could take another step, the front door creaked open behind me. I turned to see Kendra walking into the tiny apartment. She was wearing a set of faded blue scrubs, a stethoscope draped loosely around her neck. Kendra was an incredibly strong African-American woman who carried herself with a profound, quiet dignity. She had just finished a brutal 12-hour shift as a pediatric nurse at the underfunded county hospital. Her eyes were heavy with extreme fatigue, but the moment she saw me standing in her living room, her posture instantly shifted into a highly protective stance. She stepped swiftly between me and the sleeping Leo, her gaze locking onto mine with fierce intensity. "Who are you, and how did you get in here?" she demanded. Her voice kept low to avoid waking him, but laced with absolute steel. I held up my hands in a calming gesture. "I am Naomi," I whispered back. "I am Leo's older sister. We have not formally met, but he has told me wonderful things about you." Kendra's defensive posture did not immediately relax. She scrutinized my expensive designer suit and immaculate leather bag, contrasting it against the damp walls of their basement apartment. Her eyes were highly intelligent, scanning me for the same toxic manipulation she had clearly come to expect from my parents. "Right," she said, her tone guarded but slightly softer. "He mentioned you got out a long time ago. I am Kendra." She walked past me and moved quietly into the tiny kitchenette attached to the living room. Without taking a single moment to rest her exhausted body, she immediately began pulling cheap ingredients from the pantry. A box of generic pasta, a can of crushed tomatoes, and a handful of wilted vegetables. She was preparing to cook a meager meal for the man she loved, ensuring he had something hot to eat when he finally woke up. The profound, honorable love radiating from her simple actions struck a deep chord within me. "He works so hard, Kendra," I said, keeping my voice low. I did not realize things had gotten this difficult for him. Kendra scoffed quietly, chopping the vegetables with quick, precise movements. "Difficult is an understatement. Your parents completely cut him off the day he turned 18. They refused to co-sign a single student loan and laughed when he asked for help with textbooks. He works 40 hours a week turning wrenches at the auto shop and another 20 hours stocking shelves at a convenience store just to pay his tuition in cash." I watched Leo sleeping, his chest rising and falling in deep, exhausted rhythms. "He earned a dual degree while working 60 hours a week," I murmured. "Yes," Kendra replied forcefully, turning to look me directly in the eye. "And he did it entirely on his own. He is the most brilliant, honorable man I know. But your parents treat him like he is absolute dirt on their shoes. They tell him he is a failure because he does not have a fancy office job yet. Meanwhile, they constantly brag about your sister Brittany, who cannot even pass a basic exam to save her life." Kendra saw through every single layer of my parents' toxic nonsense. She was a frontline healthcare worker who dealt with real life and death crises every single day. She had zero patience for the shallow manufactured drama of my parents' suburban country club existence. "They expect him to show up to that dinner tomorrow and smile while they tear him down," Kendra continued, dropping the pasta into a pot of boiling water. "But I will not let them break his spirit. He earned that degree with his own blood and sweat. He does not need their fake approval, and he certainly does not need their money." I looked at Kendra, taking in her fierce, unwavering loyalty to my brother. She was exactly the kind of partner Leo deserved. While my parents were busy funding Brittany's fraudulent luxury trips to Milan and paying for a luxury loft with my stolen identity, Leo and Kendra were surviving on cheap pasta in a damp basement, relying entirely on their unbreakable bond. The sheer injustice of it was staggering. "You are absolutely right, Kendra," I said, stepping closer to the kitchenette. "He does not need their fake approval, and I promise you after tomorrow night he will never have to seek it again." Kendra paused, her stirring, looking at me with a sharp, questioning gaze. I did not reveal my master plan to her just yet, but I knew in that exact moment what I had to do next. I was not just going to destroy my parents and Brittany at that dinner. I was going to radically rewrite the trajectory of Leo's life. I was going to use my massive technological wealth to elevate this hardworking couple to a level of security my parents could never even dream of reaching. The cold linoleum floor pressed against my knees as I watched my brother unravel. Leo shifted at his cheap particle board desk, the sound of his heavy work boots scraping against the floorboards. He slowly lifted his head, rubbing his eyes with oil-stained hands, blinking against the harsh glare of the single overhead bulb. When his gaze finally focused and landed on me standing near the kitchenette, his entire body jolted in shock. He practically scrambled backward, his chair squeaking violently in the confined space. "Naomi," he gasped, his voice raspy from absolute exhaustion. "What are you doing here? I thought you were working overseas." The lie my parents had constructed was so pervasive that even my own brother believed it without question. I stepped forward slowly, keeping my movements gentle so I would not startle him further. "I am right here, Leo," I said softly. "I never went overseas. I came to see you before the dinner tomorrow night." Leo tried to quickly wipe the sleep from his face aggressively, attempting to pull himself together. He tried to project the image of a strong, capable man who had everything completely under control. But the physical and emotional toll of his brutal reality was impossible to hide. His shoulders sagged heavily under the weight of his greasy mechanic uniform. He looked from me to Kendra, his eyes suddenly swimming with thick, unshed tears. The tough masculine exterior completely shattered in a fraction of a second. Before he could even utter another word, a choked, agonizing sob ripped out of his chest. He buried his face in his large hands, his broad shoulders shaking violently as he broke down crying right in the middle of his tiny living room. Kendra immediately dropped her wooden spoon on the counter and rushed across the cramped apartment. She dropped to her knees beside his chair, wrapping her arms fiercely around his waist. She pulled his head against her chest, holding him with a profound and fierce tenderness that brought an ache to my throat. "It is okay, baby," she whispered over and over, pressing her face into his hair. "You are safe. You are doing so good. I am right here." I stood frozen, watching my younger brother weep with the kind of primal devastation that only comes from deep, prolonged emotional starvation. It was the crushing release of a young man who had been told his entire life that he was an unwanted burden. "I almost did not make it, Naomi." He choked out between heavy sobs, his voice muffled against Kendra's hospital scrubs. "I almost did not graduate. I have been hiding this from everyone because I was so incredibly ashamed." "What do you mean, Leo?" I asked, kneeling down on the cold floor next to them. "You worked 2 jobs. You paid your tuition entirely in cash. There is absolutely nothing to be ashamed of." He lifted his head, his eyes red and brimming with a profound, agonizing pain. "3 months ago, my final tuition payment was due," he explained, his voice trembling uncontrollably. "If I did not clear the remaining balance, the university was going to drop me from the roster right before my final exams. I was completely panicked. I had nothing left in my checking account. But then I remembered the college savings account, the one Aunt Margaret set up for me when I was a little boy. She deposited $20,000 into a trust specifically designated for my university expenses. It was supposed to mature and transfer to my direct control this year." I nodded, remembering our deceased aunt. She had been the only relative who genuinely cared about Leo. She had set up that specific fund explicitly to protect him from our parents' notorious financial abuse. I took a morning off from the auto shop and went down to the bank branch to finally claim the funds. Leo continued, his hands gripping Kendra's arms tightly for support. I walked up to the teller and handed over my identification. I told her I needed to initiate the transfer directly to the university billing department. She typed on her computer for a few minutes, and then she looked at me with this terrible, devastating pity in her eyes. She told me the account was completely empty. The air in the room suddenly felt dangerously thin. My data-driven mind immediately calculated the legal parameters of his statement. The account was empty. I repeated, my voice turning dangerously cold. Leo nodded, a fresh tear sliding down his cheek. "Because the account was technically set up with Dad as the custodial guardian, until my graduation, he legally had full access to the funds." The teller printed out the transaction history for me. My parents drained the entire $20,000 exactly 1 week before I went to the bank. They wiped out every single penny Aunt Margaret left for my future. Kendra held him tighter, her eyes flashing with a lethal protective fury that perfectly matched the cold rage solidifying in my own chest. "What did they say when you confronted them?" I asked, demanding the absolute truth. Leo swallowed hard, his voice dropping to a broken, terrified whisper. "I drove straight to their house in my work uniform. I begged Dad to give the money back. I told him I was going to be kicked out of school just weeks before earning my dual degree. I told him I would lose everything I had worked 4 brutal years to build. Do you know what he told me, Naomi?" I waited the silence in the basement apartment, screaming loudly in my ears. "He looked me dead in the eye." Leo sobbed, the memory clearly ripping his heart to shreds all over again. "He told me that Brittany needed a Hermes Birkin bag to look the part for her upcoming law firm interviews. He said she needed to project extreme wealth to secure a rich husband. And then he looked down at my work boots and said, 'You are a man. Go flip burgers if you need cash. Your sister is the real priority.'" The sheer, unadulterated evil of that statement hung heavily in the damp air. My parents had actively, intentionally sabotaged my brother's college graduation just to purchase a luxury handbag for a daughter who was secretly failing every single academic benchmark. They had stolen money from a dead woman to fund a fake lifestyle while telling their hardworking son to go flip burgers to survive. It was a level of psychological warfare and financial abuse that defied all human logic and basic morality. Kendra pulled Leo closer, kissing his forehead with fierce, unwavering devotion. "You are enough, Leo," she told him, her voice steady and powerfully clear. "You are more of a man than he will ever be. You built your life with your own two hands. You do not need his stolen money, and you do not need his toxic love. You have me, and we are going to build a beautiful life together." Watching Kendra hold my broken brother, validating his worth, when his own parents had systematically destroyed it, triggered a massive tectonic shift inside my brain. The cold, analytical rage I had been carrying for the past 3 weeks suddenly crystallized into something entirely different. It became a silent, unbreakable vow. I was not just going to execute a controlled demolition of my parents' fraudulent empire at that dinner tomorrow night. Exposing their federal wire fraud and sending them to prison was simply the baseline requirement for justice. I needed to go much further. I needed to inflict the exact opposite of their cruelty. I was going to use my massive technological wealth to elevate Leo and Kendra to a level of untouchable security that Harrison and Cynthia could never even dream of reaching. I was going to buy them the ultimate payoff. I stood up from the cold linoleum floor, smoothing the immaculate fabric of my designer suit. The master plan was fully locked in. "Get some sleep, Leo," I commanded, my voice radiating an absolute terrifying authority. "You earned your degree and you are going to celebrate tomorrow night. I promise you everything is about to change forever." I turned and walked out of the cramped, damp apartment, stepping back out into the harsh city street. I pulled out my secure phone and navigated directly to my premium real estate contacts. I had exactly 24 hours to execute the most aggressive financial transaction of my entire life. I needed to buy a house. I scrolled through my encrypted contact list and tapped the private number for Veronica, an elite real estate broker who handled high net worth corporate relocations. I did not have time for open houses or lengthy bidding wars. I needed an aggressive agent who understood that unlimited capital could bend the normal rules of real estate. When she answered, I gave her my exact parameters. I needed a flawless turnkey property in a premium, safe suburban neighborhood, and I needed to close the transaction in cash by tomorrow afternoon. Veronica did not hesitate. Money talks loudly, and $4 million speaks an absolute, undeniable language. The next morning, I stood on the pristine sidewalk of a quiet, tree-lined street. The neighborhood was a sanctuary of safety and stability, a world away from the exhaust fumes and damp walls of Leo's basement unit. Veronica unlocked the heavy oak front door of a stunning 3-bedroom craftsman-style home listed at exactly $450,000. As I stepped over the threshold, the sheer beauty of the space confirmed it was the perfect sanctuary for my brother. Natural light flooded through massive bay windows, illuminating the flawless Brazilian hardwood floors. I walked straight into the heart of the home, the kitchen. It was an absolute culinary masterpiece featuring top-of-the-line stainless steel appliances, pristine white quartz countertops, and a massive custom center island. I immediately pictured Kendra standing in this beautiful, bright space. After working grueling 12-hour shifts at the pediatric ward, she deserved to cook in a kitchen designed for absolute comfort and luxury, not a cramped, dark corner with peeling linoleum. She deserved a space where she could finally breathe. Through the sliding glass doors, I surveyed the sprawling, fully fenced backyard. It was a massive expanse of perfectly manicured green grass, shaded by ancient oak trees. It was the exact kind of safe enclosed space where Leo and Kendra could eventually raise children without ever worrying about the dangers of the streets outside. The master suite upstairs featured a walk-in closet larger than Leo's entire current living room and an ensuite bathroom with a deep soaking tub and a dual rain shower. It was not just a piece of real estate, it was a fortress of absolute peace and security. I turned to Veronica, standing quietly in the sunlit foyer. "I will take it," I said, pulling out my checkbook. "I am paying the entire asking price in pure cash, and I am including a massive premium for an expedited 24-hour closing. Call the sellers right now and tell them the funds are fully verified and ready to wire immediately." Within 45 minutes, the sellers eagerly accepted the aggressive all-cash offer. But simply buying the house was only half of the strategy. I needed to ensure that my toxic parents could never weaponize this property against Leo. They had already stolen his $20,000 college fund to buy Brittany a luxury handbag. I knew their greed had absolutely no limits. I immediately brought Alexander Davis, my financial attorney, back onto a secure conference call. I instructed him to draft the precise legal architecture to shield this massive physical asset. We placed the newly purchased property directly into an impenetrable legal vehicle, an irrevocable trust. I explicitly named Leo and Kendra as the absolute sole and exclusive beneficiaries. Because the property was held within the rigid confines of the irrevocable trust, it legally belonged to the trust entity itself rather than to me or to Leo personally. This created a flawless titanium shield against any external financial claims. If my parents somehow discovered the asset and attempted to claim it was a family property purchased with my wealth, they would hit a solid brick wall of federal trust laws. They could never attach a lien against the house to cover Brittany's fraudulent debts. They could never sue Leo for the equity to fund their failing mortgages. Even if they tried to manipulate Leo into selling the house to give them money, the strict parameters of the trust legally prevented him from liquidating the asset to pay off family debts. The house was entirely untouchable. It was a permanent generational asset secured entirely for my brother and his brilliant fiancée. By 3 in the afternoon, the frantic wire transfers were fully cleared. The heavy brass keys and the certified property deed were sitting safely inside a thick manila envelope in my designer bag. I had successfully converted a fraction of my tech wealth into an indestructible physical sanctuary for the only two people in the world who actually deserved it. The stage was now completely set for the ultimate confrontation. The devastating evidence of my parents' federal wire fraud, the geolocation logs, the forged signature files, and the brutal breakdown of Brittany's luxury spending spree was neatly organized in my briefcase, alongside the keys to Leo's new empire. I walked back to my luxury hotel room and began pulling out the sharp, intimidating designer suit I had specifically purchased for this evening. I was about to walk into a room full of people who thought I was an easy target, an ugly dropout they could extort to fund their fake reality. It was time to get dressed for the graduation dinner. It was time to watch the absolute destruction of the people who had tried to bury us. I stood in front of the full-length hotel mirror, adjusting the sharp lapels of my tailored suit, when my phone chimed loudly from the granite vanity. I picked up the device and saw a notification from a number I had not saved in years but immediately recognized. It was Brittany. I unlocked the screen. The message began with a high-resolution image. It was a photograph taken inside a high-end luxury boutique showing a gleaming gold and steel Cartier watch, resting elegantly on a black velvet display cushion. The price tag was partially visible, clearly displaying a figure just over $5,000. A second text balloon popped up underneath the image. Since you are finally bothering to show up to a family event, you better bring a proper gift. Brittany wrote, her sheer entitlement bleeding heavily through the digital screen. Dad says you owe the family big time. It is time to pay us back for raising you. The boutique holds this model for 24 hours. Do not embarrass us tonight, Naomi. I need this watch to look the part for my upcoming partner track interviews. I stared at the bright screen, feeling a cold, analytical calm wash completely over me. The absolute audacity of her message was staggering. She knew about my $4 million buyout. Harrison and Cynthia had absolutely shared the contents of my intercepted mail with her. They were all collectively salivating over my bank accounts, already dividing up my hard-earned wealth in their greedy, delusional minds. Brittany actually believed that after stealing my legal identity to commit federal wire fraud, she could casually text me and demand a $5,000 piece of luxury jewelry as a tribute. She was actively using a forged $250,000 loan in my name to fund her fake lawyer lifestyle while secretly failing the bar exam 3 times. Yet she still wanted to extract even more blood from my veins. She viewed my massive tech success not as an achievement to be celebrated, but as a convenient, endless ATM to fund her pathetic facade. I did not type out an angry, emotional paragraph. I did not confront her about the stolen social security number or the massive private student loan actively destroying my credit score. I simply let her continue digging her own massive grave. I tapped the digital keyboard with slow, deliberate precision. "Do not worry, Brittany," I typed back, keeping the tone perfectly ambiguous. "I have a gift prepared that will completely change your life. You and Mom will be in tears." Less than 10 seconds later, my phone buzzed again. Brittany replied with a single smug smiling emoji wearing sunglasses. She was so blinded by her own extreme narcissism and greed that she completely missed the lethal threat embedded securely in my response. She genuinely thought she had successfully bullied me into submission. She truly believed she was about to receive a Cartier watch paid for by the sister she had ruthlessly scammed and discarded. I set the phone down and let out a sharp, dry laugh. The stark contrast between my two siblings was almost unbelievable. Just 24 hours ago, Leo was sitting in a damp basement apartment sobbing uncontrollably because he thought he was going to lose his hard-earned college degree over a stolen $20,000 tuition fund. He asked for absolutely nothing and worked 60 brutal hours a week turning wrenches just to survive. Meanwhile, Brittany was lounging in a panoramic luxury loft, funded entirely by federal wire fraud, casually demanding luxury jewelry as compensation for merely existing. The sheer delusion of my parents enabling this behavior was sickening. They had drained Leo's modest savings to buy Brittany a Hermes bag, and now they were actively encouraging her to extort me for a Cartier watch. They had completely abandoned any semblance of morality to worship their golden child. Their absolute lack of ethics only solidified my resolve. Every ounce of mercy or familial obligation I might have subconsciously harbored was entirely gone. I was not dealing with family members anymore. I was dealing with hostile parasites who needed to be permanently eradicated from my life. I grabbed the thick manila folder containing the absolute undeniable proof of their federal crimes, the metadata logs, the IP tracking verifying the fraud originated from my parents' suburban home, and the detailed financial ledger showing exactly how Brittany spent the stolen loan money. I placed the devastating dossier carefully into my designer bag, directly alongside the pristine property deed to Leo's new $450,000 house. My phone vibrated one last time. It was a secure message from Special Agent Thompson confirming that the federal task force and local authorities were already in position outside the upscale steakhouse downtown. The arrest warrants for Harrison, Cynthia, and Brittany were fully authorized and ready for immediate execution. The trap was perfectly set. I checked my reflection in the mirror one last time. The tailored lines of my dark suit projected absolute power and unyielding authority. I did not look like the scared 18-year-old girl they had thrown out into the cold. I looked like an executioner. It was finally time to go to dinner and deliver the ultimate payoff. Before walking into that private dining room to deliver the ultimate payoff, I had one critical stop to make. The actual reason for this entire day was happening earlier that afternoon at the main university arena. It was Leo's official graduation ceremony. I slipped out of my hotel room and put on a pair of oversized dark designer sunglasses to conceal my identity. I hailed a black car and directed the driver to the campus. I desperately wanted to witness my younger brother's massive triumph, but I needed to remain completely undetected by the toxic parasites who shared my last name. The element of surprise for the dinner had to remain perfectly intact. I slipped quietly through the heavy double doors of the massive arena and found a discreet seat in the very back row of the upper balcony. From this elevated vantage point, I had a clear, unobstructed view of the entire stadium floor and the thousands of guest seats below. The atmosphere was buzzing with electric pride. Families were clutching bouquets of flowers, holding up handmade signs, and wiping away happy tears as the university president began his opening remarks. It was a beautiful display of genuine love and support. Exactly 25 minutes after the opening procession had already started, a loud, disruptive commotion near the center aisle caught my attention. I looked down and felt my jaw clench with instant revulsion. Harrison, Cynthia, and Brittany had finally arrived. They did not slip in quietly or respectfully to minimize their late arrival. They paraded down the stadium steps as if they were walking a Hollywood red carpet, expecting the entire crowd to part for their grand entrance. Their attire was violently inappropriate for a daytime academic ceremony. Brittany was squeezed into a tight neon pink cocktail dress, clicking her heavy stiletto heels loudly against the concrete stairs and huffing with exaggerated annoyance. Cynthia was wearing an oversized designer sun hat that completely blocked the view of the poor family sitting directly behind her. Harrison trailed behind them, looking deeply irritated, checking his expensive watch and aggressively shoving past a group of elderly grandparents. They finally claimed 3 seats in a premium section, complaining loudly enough for the surrounding rows to hear. I watched from the shadows of the balcony, my blood slowly coming to a boil as their disgraceful performance continued. Instead of scanning the sea of black gowns on the stadium floor to find Leo, they immediately turned the graduation ceremony into their own personal photo shoot. Brittany pulled out her phone and spent the next 45 minutes entirely focused on herself. She constantly adjusted her hair, applied lip gloss, and snapped endless selfies with Cynthia. She angled her camera to capture the graduation stage in the background, ensuring she had the perfect aesthetic prop for her social media feed. I could practically read her mind. She was gathering digital proof to show her followers what a supportive, loving sister she was while actively ignoring the actual human being she was supposed to be celebrating. Harrison sat beside them, looking utterly bored out of his mind. He slouched in his folding chair, scrolling mindlessly through his phone and occasionally letting out loud, dramatic sighs of impatience. They were just ticking a mandatory box on their social calendar. They were performing the role of a respectable family for their own massive egos, while treating Leo's monumental achievement like a tedious inconvenience. As the ceremony progressed, the dean finally began calling the names of the graduates from the Business and Communications College. The arena erupted with cheers and applause as each student walked across the stage. I leaned forward in my balcony seat, scanning the line of students waiting in the wings. There he was. Leo stood near the stairs, looking incredibly sharp in his cap and gown. His face was a mixture of deep exhaustion and profound, overwhelming pride. He had worked 60 hours a week changing oil and rotating tires just to stand on that stage today. He had survived the cruel theft of his college fund and pushed through extreme poverty to earn a dual degree entirely debt-free. The announcer called the names closer and closer to our last name. I shifted my gaze back down to my family, expecting them to at least pretend to care for the 10 seconds it would take for Leo to cross the stage. Surely they would stand up. Surely they would put their phones away for a single moment. I was completely wrong. Just as the announcer approached the end of the alphabet, Harrison suddenly received a phone call. Instead of declining it or stepping outside, my father actually answered the phone right there in the middle of the crowded arena. He began speaking loudly about some minor corporate logistics, completely drowning out the names being read over the loudspeaker. At that exact same moment, Cynthia opened her glittering compact mirror and began meticulously reapplying her bright red lipstick. She was completely engrossed in her own reflection. Brittany was busy selecting a digital filter for her latest selfie, completely oblivious to the stage. Leo Harrison, the announcer, called out, his voice echoing across the vast stadium. Leo stepped onto the brightly lit stage. He took his diploma, shook the dean's hand, and turned to face the massive crowd. He immediately looked toward the premium seating section, searching desperately for his parents. He was looking for a single nod of approval, a brief smile, a scattered clap. He received absolute crushing silence. Harrison was barking into his cell phone. Cynthia was smacking her lips together in her mirror. Brittany was staring at a glowing screen. Not one of them looked at the stage. Not one of them clapped their hands. They made Leo completely invisible in the exact moment he shined the brightest. The sheer breathtaking cruelty of their indifference hit me like a physical blow to the chest. But the agonizing silence from their row was suddenly shattered by a beautiful explosive sound from the section just across the aisle. Kendra leaped onto her folding chair, completely disregarding arena rules. She cupped her hands around her mouth and screamed at the absolute top of her lungs. Her voice cut through the noise of the crowd, vibrating with fierce, unadulterated love. "That is my husband," she screamed, cheering and clapping with a chaotic, beautiful energy. "You did it, baby. We are so proud of you." Leo scanned the crowd, bypassing the toxic black hole where his biological parents sat, and instantly found Kendra. His exhausted face lit up with a massive, radiant smile. Tears shone in his eyes as he held his diploma high in the air, pointing directly at the woman who had carried him through the darkest days of his life. The surrounding crowd, moved by Kendra's raw, infectious joy, erupted into loud applause, joining her in celebrating the young man on stage. I stood alone in the dark balcony, a single tear escaping from beneath my oversized sunglasses. I did not bother to wipe it away. Watching how utterly invisible Leo was to the people who brought him into this world permanently sealed their fate in my mind. The $450,000 house, waiting in my designer bag, was no longer just a generous graduation gift. It was a profound, absolute rescue operation. I was pulling him entirely out of their toxic wreckage. I turned my back on the arena floor and walked out into the bright afternoon sun. The rage inside had crystallized into a flawless diamond of pure strategic execution. I hailed another car to take me to the upscale steakhouse downtown. The graduation ceremony was over, but the real education for my parents and my golden sister was about to begin. It was finally time for dinner. I returned to my luxury hotel suite with precisely 2 hours to prepare for the final execution. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the city skyline, casting long shadows across the immaculate room. I did not feel tired. The adrenaline pumping through my veins was a cold, calculated energy. It was the absolute focus of a predator finally cornering its prey. I walked into the sprawling marble bathroom and turned on the shower, letting the scalding water wash away the lingering dust of the graduation arena. As the steam filled the room, I mentally reviewed every single piece of evidence waiting securely inside my leather bag. The forged signatures, the internet protocol logs, the financial routing numbers. Everything was perfectly aligned. I stepped out of the shower and began the meticulous process of armoring myself. This was not a family dinner. It was a corporate slaughter. I bypassed the softer dresses and casual evening wear I had packed for the trip. Instead, I reached for a bespoke designer suit I had purchased specifically for hostile boardroom negotiations. The fabric was a deep midnight blue woven from raw silk and cut with razor-sharp precision by a master tailor. The shoulders were highly structured, projecting an aura of unyielding authority. The trousers fell perfectly over a pair of intimidating black stiletto heels. I pulled my hair back into a sleek, tight twist, ensuring there were no loose strands to soften my appearance. I applied minimal makeup using just a sharp wing of eyeliner and a dark matte lipstick. When I looked in the full-length mirror, the physical transformation was absolute. The frightened, desperate 18-year-old girl who had begged for her parents' love on a freezing front porch was entirely dead. In her place stood a lethal data director holding the power to annihilate them completely. As I fastened a simple silver watch around my wrist, my encrypted phone vibrated loudly against the glass vanity. The caller identification displayed Detective Mitchell's secure line. I tapped the screen and brought the device to my ear. The ticking clock in my head grew significantly louder. "We are fully greenlit," Mitchell said, his voice carrying the crisp, low cadence of a military operation. "I just received the official confirmation from Special Agent Thompson. The Bank Fraud Division has officially signed off on the evidence. The federal arrest warrants for Harrison, Cynthia, and Brittany are fully authorized and active." I checked my reflection one last time, adjusting my stiff collar. "What is the tactical layout?" I asked, my voice perfectly steady. "The federal task force has secured the perimeter around the steakhouse," Mitchell reported smoothly. "They have 3 unmarked black sport utility vehicles positioned strategically at the front entrance and the rear service exits. There is absolutely zero chance of a runner slipping through. Thompson has 2 plainclothes agents waiting inside the main lobby, blending in with the dinner crowd. They are instructed to wait for your visual signal before moving toward the private dining room. We are giving you the floor, Naomi. You have complete control of the timeline. Once you drop the hammer, they will breach the room and execute the arrests." "Understood," I replied, feeling a dark, profound satisfaction settling deep into my chest. My parents thought they were so incredibly clever. They thought they had orchestrated the perfect extortion trap in a high-end restaurant to force my hand. They had absolutely no idea they were walking blindly into a federal sting operation built entirely by the daughter they ruthlessly threw away. Good luck, Naomi Mitchell said just before disconnecting. Happy hunting. I grabbed my designer leather bag, feeling the heavy, solid weight of the brass house keys representing Leo's newfound freedom and the thick manila folder representing my parents' absolute destruction. I walked out of my hotel room and descended to the main lobby where my hired black car was already waiting. The city traffic was heavy, but my driver navigated it with aggressive efficiency. Every red light we hit felt like the universe pausing to let me savor this impending victory. I watched the pedestrians rushing down the busy sidewalks, completely unaware of the massive federal takedown about to occur just a few blocks away. The drive to the upscale steakhouse took exactly 14 minutes. My mind remained as calm and still as a frozen lake. We pulled onto the vibrant downtown avenue and approached the restaurant. The establishment was a beacon of old money and extreme luxury, with busy valet attendants rushing to open the heavy doors of expensive sports cars. As my driver pulled up to the curb, my highly trained eyes immediately spotted the federal presence. To the untrained observer, the busy street looked perfectly normal. But I saw the sleek black sport utility vehicles idling quietly in the loading zones. I saw the men in dark suits sitting completely motionless behind heavily tinted glass. The invisible net was pulled tight. I stepped out of my car, my stilettos clicking sharply against the concrete pavement. I did not hesitate. I walked straight past the valet stand and through the heavy glass doors of the restaurant. The interior of the steakhouse was dark and opulent, smelling strongly of aged leather and expensive roasted meat. The lobby was crowded with wealthy patrons waiting for their tables. I scanned the room and instantly locked eyes with a tall, broad-shouldered man standing near the coat check. He was wearing a gray suit, his posture rigid and alert. The subtle earpiece tucked behind his collar gave him away. He was one of Special Agent Thompson's men. I held his gaze for a fraction of a second and gave him a single, nearly imperceptible nod. He nodded back, confirming he was ready. I turned away from the federal agent and approached the front desk. "I am here for the private dining room," I told the hostess, my voice cutting easily through the ambient noise of the restaurant. "Right this way, madam," she replied, giving me a polite customer service smile, completely unaware she was leading me to an active war zone. She gestured toward a heavy oak door at the end of a dimly lit hallway. I followed her down the quiet corridor, my heart beating with slow, powerful thuds. With every single step, the culmination of 16 years of pain and brutal rejection converted into pure righteous justice. The hostess reached the door and pulled it open for me. I stepped over the threshold, walking directly into the lion's den. I scanned the room, taking in the sickening sight of my father complaining about prices, my mother fussing over Brittany's hair, and Leo sitting quietly in his oversized suit. The trap was fully sprung. The final countdown had officially reached 0. I walked toward the heavy mahogany table, my high heels clicking sharply against the polished floor. My mother, Cynthia, immediately stopped fussing with Brittany's hair and flashed me that sickeningly fake smile she had practiced specifically for this ambush. My father, Harrison, barely looked up from his menu, but I could see the greedy anticipation tightening his jaw. I did not bother pulling out a chair or exchanging pleasantries. I reached directly into my designer bag and pulled out the thick manila envelope and the heavy brass keys. I tossed them firmly onto the center of the white tablecloth right next to Leo's plate. They landed with a heavy, solid thud. "Happy graduation, Leo," I said, my voice slicing through the quiet room. "It is a 3-bedroom house fully paid off in a trust entirely under your name." The entire private dining room went dead silent. You could have heard a pin drop as everyone stared at the envelope. Leo looked at me with wide, unblinking eyes, completely paralyzed by shock. His grease-stained hands trembled as he slowly reached out and picked up the thick envelope. Kendra leaned in close, her shoulder pressing against his as he pulled out the certified property deed. Her exhausted eyes scanned the official legal documents, taking in the premium suburban address and the absolute zero balance owed. The realization hit them both like a massive tidal wave. The damp, moldy basement apartment and the brutal double shifts at the gas station were permanently over. Kendra burst into bright, happy tears, wrapping her arms fiercely around Leo's neck. She buried her face in his shoulder, weeping with a profound sheer relief that only comes from knowing you never have to struggle to survive again. Leo pulled her tight against his chest, staring at the brass keys with an expression of pure, absolute awe. Then the toxic explosion finally happened. My father turned a violent shade of purple. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive silk tie. He slammed his fists down onto the heavy wooden table so hard that the crystal water glasses violently rattled and spilled icy liquid across the white linen. "Are you insane?" Harrison screamed, his face contorted with pure, greedy rage. That money was supposed to pay off Brittany's loans. Before the echo of his shouting could even fade, my mother lunged across the table. Her eyes were wide with manic desperation, as her manicured hands clawed through the air trying to snatch the deed envelope right out from under Leo's nose. She almost knocked over a bottle of red wine in her frantic scramble to grab the documents. But she was not fast enough. Kendra moved with lightning speed. Without missing a single beat, Kendra reached out and forcefully slapped my mother's hand away. The smack echoed sharply in the small room. "Do not touch my husband's property," Kendra said, her voice absolute ice. She pulled the envelope safely into Leo's lap and positioned her body between him and my frantic mother. She stood her ground with a calm, terrifying strength. My mother recoiled, clutching her stinging hand against her chest. She looked at Kendra with absolute disgust, her face twisting into a mask of pure hatred. "How dare you speak to me that way, you ungrateful girl," Cynthia spat. "Leo went to some cheap local college. He does not deserve a whole house. Brittany is the one who went to an elite law school. She is the future of this family. She is the one who needs the investment, not a mechanic and a hospital worker." Brittany violently pushed her chair back. The heavy wood screeched loudly against the floor as she stood up. Her face was twisted into a hideous mask of sheer, unadulterated entitlement. She glared at the shiny brass keys in Leo's hand and then turned her furious gaze directly onto me. "Y'all bought him a house!" Brittany screeched, her voice hitting a shrill, hysterical pitch. "I have $250,000 in debt. You are the co-signer, Naomi. You have to pay it, or your precious millionaire credit score is ruined." She practically spat the words out, completely exposing their entire sinister plot loud and clear. Brittany had absolutely no idea she was confessing to a federal crime in front of a room full of people. She was so blinded by her own extreme narcissism and greed that she actually believed she held the ultimate leverage over me. "We know about your $4 million app buyout," Brittany continued, crossing her arms and glaring at me with a smug, arrogant smirk. "Dad read your mail. You are rich now. You can easily afford to buy me a house and pay off my student loans. I am the one who deserves to live in luxury. I am the one going on a partner track. You owe this family for raising you, and kicking you out was the best thing we ever did because it made you rich. Now it is time to pay up. If you do not sign the retroactive consent forms tonight and wire the money to my account, the bank is going to come after you. Your perfect credit score will be completely destroyed." My father nodded aggressively, backing up his golden child. "Your sister is absolutely right," Naomi, Harrison growled, pointing a stiff finger at my face. "You are going to sit down right now and sign the tax documents we brought. You are going to take responsibility for that loan. We sacrificed everything to give Brittany a proper lifestyle so she could secure a wealthy husband and elevate this family name. We bought her that Porsche and that downtown loft as an investment. You are going to pay the bill because you are blood and you owe us." Cynthia joined the verbal assault, leaning heavily against the table and glaring at me with vicious resentment. "You have always been so incredibly selfish," Naomi Cynthia hissed. "You hoarded all your tech money while your sister struggled. We had to take out secondary mortgages just to keep up appearances because you refused to help your own flesh and blood. You are going to fix this tonight. You are going to pay off Brittany's debt, and then you are going to buy her a house twice as big as the one you just wasted on your brother." I watched Brittany stomp her stiletto heel against the polished floor, throwing a literal temper tantrum like a spoiled toddler. She demanded to know why I would waste a brand new home on someone who worked with his hands. She yelled that Leo was just a blue-collar worker who would probably ruin the nice suburban neighborhood with his greasy boots. Kendra pulled Leo closer, whispering words of fierce love and validation into his ear, entirely ignoring my sister's vile insults. The pure, honorable love radiating from Leo and Kendra made my parents' greedy screaming look even more pathetic and grotesque. My parents were completely devoid of any moral compass. They were empty, shallow vessels who only cared about country club status and designer labels. They genuinely believed that stealing my social security number was a justified parenting decision. They felt absolutely zero remorse for committing federal wire fraud. They only felt rage that I was not willingly handing over my remaining millions to fund their delusional fantasies. I stood completely motionless, absorbing the sheer, breathtaking audacity of their demands. They thought they had me perfectly trapped. They thought the threat of a ruined credit score would force me to surrender my fortune and bow to their toxic authority. I looked at Brittany's smug, entitled face. I looked at my father's greedy, furious eyes. I looked at my mother's desperate, manipulative sneer. They had just freely admitted to opening my mail, discovering my wealth, and orchestrating this entire dinner to extort $250,000 from me. They had confessed to everything right out loud. The trap they thought they had set for me was actually the very cage that was about to lock them away forever. I reached back into my designer bag, feeling the thick, heavy dossier compiled by my private investigator and my financial attorney. The final countdown was officially over. It was time to execute the ultimate strike. I did not flinch. I did not raise my voice to match their hysterical screeching. I did not break eye contact with the people who had actively tried to ruin my future. Instead, I reached my hand deep into my designer bag and pulled out the thick, heavy manila folder. It contained over 200 pages of raw financial data, legal tracking logs, and exhaustive private investigator reports compiled by the best professionals in California. I lifted the massive stack of documents and slammed it directly onto my father's pristine china plate. The violent impact knocked his expensive steak knife onto the floor with a sharp metallic clatter. My father jumped back to his chair, scraping loudly against the polished hardwood. He stared at the folder in absolute confusion, his face still flushed dark red from his greedy outburst. My mother blinked rapidly, her fake eyelashes fluttering as she tried to comprehend why I was not crying or reaching for my checkbook. Brittany let out a dramatic, heavy sigh and rolled her eyes. "What is this garbage, Naomi?" she asked, crossing her arms defiantly over her chest. "More useless text spreadsheets. You really think we care about your boring office work right now? Just sign the consent forms and wire the cash." I rested my hands flat on the white tablecloth, leaning forward slightly. My voice dropped to a pitch so deadly quiet and razor-sharp that the entire dining room had to hold its breath just to hear me. "Oh, you mean the $250,000 private student loan you took out by forging my digital signature?" I asked, my words slicing through the heavy air like a surgical blade. "The exact same massive financial loan you actively defaulted on 90 days ago to intentionally destroy my credit score." The color instantly vanished from my father's face. The angry purple flush drained away in a single second, leaving his skin a sickly ash white. His jaw fell completely slack. He looked like a man who had just stepped on a landmine and heard the internal mechanism click. I tapped my manicured fingernail against the top of the heavy folder. Inside this file is the raw metadata log legally subpoenaed directly from the loan provider. I stated, my tone brutally clinical. It shows the exact digital signature timestamp from 2 years ago. And would you like to know the most fascinating part, Dad? I looked him dead in the eye, watching the sheer panic rise in his pupils. The Internet Protocol address, used to execute that massive financial contract, maps directly to the router sitting in your suburban living room. The recovery email used for the fake account routes straight back to your personal cell phone number. You left a flawless, undeniable digital trail of federal wire fraud. My mother let out a strangled, horrific gasp. Her hand flew to her throat, clutching her pearl necklace as if she was suddenly choking on the very air in the room. Cynthia began rapidly hyperventilating, taking short, panicked gasps as her chest heaved. Brittany froze completely solid. The smug, arrogant smirk melted right off her face, leaving behind pure, unfiltered terror. The heavy, expensive watch on her wrist suddenly looked like a cheap, heavy shackle. I turned my absolute focus onto my golden sister, ready to completely dismantle her entire reality. "I know exactly where my stolen money went, Brittany," I continued, my voice echoing loudly and clearly in the silent room. My elite private investigator legally acquired your university billing records and academic transcripts. You did not use a single cent of those funds for tuition because you were academically dismissed during your second semester. You have a catastrophically low grade point average. You have failed the state bar exam 3 consecutive times. You do not have a license to practice law in any state. You are not on a partner track. You do not even have a job. You are an unemployed absolute fraud playing dress up on social media. Brittany opened her mouth to speak, but absolutely no sound came out. Her hands began to shake violently. Her phone slipped from her trembling fingers and crashed onto the hard floor, shattering the screen instantly. You used a stolen $250,000 to lease a custom white Porsche Macan, I stated ruthlessly, reading her entire fake life back to her piece by piece. You wired $80,000 to secure a prepaid lease on a downtown luxury loft so you could pretend you were successful. You bought imported caviar designer clothing and took luxury yacht trips to Milan, while our brother Leo was scrubbing thick engine grease off his hands just to pay for his textbooks and cash. You literally wore my stolen financial security to look wealthy enough to trap a rich corporate husband before the money finally ran out. I shifted my cold gaze back to my parents. They were both physically shrinking into their dining chairs, completely crushed by the overwhelming weight of the exposed truth. "And you too?" I said, pointing a steady finger at Harrison, "and Cynthia funded this entire criminal enterprise because you are currently drowning in multiple secondary mortgages. My investigator pulled your tax records and property deeds. Your retirement accounts are completely empty. You are totally and utterly bankrupt. You lost all your money trying to maintain your pathetic country club image. You deliberately gambled my legal identity and my financial future on a daughter who cannot even pass a basic academic exam. You committed a massive federal felony just to buy yourselves a few more years of fake suburban prestige." The silence that followed my monologue was absolute perfection. It was the sound of a toxic empire crumbling into a million tiny, unrecognizable pieces. My parents were no longer the intimidating authoritarian figures of my youth. They were just two broke, desperate criminals caught completely red-handed. Brittany was staring at the shattered remains of her phone on the floor, her chest heaving with silent, panicked sobs as the illusion of her wealthy lawyer lifestyle was brutally stripped away in front of everyone. I glanced over at Leo and Kendra. Leo was staring at my parents with a look of absolute profound disgust. Any lingering doubt he had about their true nature was completely erased. Kendra stood tall beside him, her hand resting proudly on his shoulder, a fierce smile of pure vindication spreading across her beautiful face. The undeniable proof of their crimes was lying right on the table. The scapegoat had just become the absolute executioner, and there was nowhere left for the golden child or my toxic parents to hide. The heavy silence in the private dining room stretched to its absolute breaking point before my father finally shattered it. True to his deeply ingrained narcissistic nature, Harrison did not offer a single word of apology. He did not express an ounce of remorse for destroying my credit score or stealing my financial identity. Instead, his brain rapidly executed massive mental gymnastics to justify his criminal actions. He puffed out his chest, attempting to regain his authoritarian posture despite the crushing evidence laid out on his dinner plate. "We were going to pay it all back, Naomi," he shouted, his voice echoing harshly off the wood-paneled walls. He pointed an aggressive finger at me, completely ignoring the massive federal felony he had just been caught committing. "We just needed your good credit score to secure the funds temporarily. Brittany is a brilliant girl. She just needed a little more time to pass that ridiculous exam and secure her partnership. Once she landed the wealthy husband and the high-paying job, she was going to pay the entire balance off. We only used your name as a temporary bridge." I stared at him with eyes as hard and cold as diamonds. "A temporary bridge," I repeated, my voice dangerously level. "You defaulted on $250,000 90 days ago. You deliberately let the account go into severe collections, destroying my financial standing. That is not a bridge, Dad. That is an execution." Harrison waved his hand dismissively, entirely rejecting accountability. "You are being completely unreasonable and overly dramatic." He scoffed, his face reddening again. "You just sold your tech company for $4 million. We read the magazine mailer. We know you are a millionaire now. $250,000 is absolute pocket change to you. You could write a check right now and make this entire situation go away without blinking. You owe us for giving you life. You owe us for putting a roof over your head for 18 years before you selfishly abandoned this family. The sheer pathetic delusion was staggering. He was actively standing over the smoking ruins of his own criminal conspiracy, and he still firmly believed I was obligated to rescue him. He viewed my massive self-made success not as an achievement to be celebrated, but as a convenient, endless slush fund to cover his illegal mistakes. He felt entirely entitled to the wealth I had built with my own blood and sweat after he had ruthlessly thrown me out into the cold. Seeing that Harrison's aggressive intimidation tactics were completely failing to break my calm exterior, my mother decided to violently switch strategies. Cynthia realized that authoritarian demands would not work, so she instantly deployed the ultimate weapon in a toxic parent's arsenal. She weaponized maternal desperation. Cynthia threw herself out of her expensive dining chair and violently dropped to her knees right on the hard restaurant floor. She scrambled across the polished wood and desperately grabbed the hem of my designer skirt. Her flawless country club makeup was completely ruined by heavy theatrical tears streaming down her face. She looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, attempting to play the role of the devoted mother pushed to the absolute brink. "Naomi, please, you cannot do this to us!" Cynthia wailed, her voice cracking with manufactured hysteria. Her manicured fingers dug tightly into the fabric of my suit. "We are a family. You cannot destroy us over money. We just wanted Brittany to succeed so she could help all of us in the long run. We were drowning in our secondary mortgages. We were terrified of losing our beautiful home. We made a desperate mistake, but we did it out of love for this family. Please just sign the retroactive consent form tonight. Pay off the loan and let us move forward as a united family. You have the money. You can save us all." She was sobbing uncontrollably, gripping my legs tightly, trying to physically anchor me to her delusional reality. She actually expected me to sign away my financial freedom and casually absorb a massive federal crime, simply because she squeezed a few tears out of her eyes. It was the most pathetic, humiliating display of manipulation I had ever witnessed. They never apologize for the deep wounds they inflict. They only make endless excuses and demand absolute blind loyalty. I looked down at the woman who had spent my entire childhood telling me I was a useless, plain disappointment. I looked at the mother who had eagerly sacrificed my future to buy her golden daughter a luxury sports car and a high-end loft. I felt absolutely zero empathy. My heart remained a solid, impenetrable fortress of ice. I took a firm, deliberate step backward, forcefully, pulling the fabric of my skirt out of her desperate, clutching hands. I looked down at her kneeling on the floor in absolute disgust. "You did not give me life," I said, my voice cutting through her loud sobbing with chilling precision. "You gave me a nightmare. You spent my entire youth making me feel like an unwanted burden while you worshipped a daughter who is nothing but a pathetic fraud. You kicked me out to starve while you drained Leo's college fund to buy designer handbags. And now you expect me to bail you out because you finally got caught." Cynthia gasped, looking up at me as if I had just slapped her across the face. "But we are blood, Naomi," she cried out, her hands reaching up toward me again. "We are your blood." I stepped even further back, completely severing any physical connection between us. "Blood does not make a family. Cynthia." I stated my words, dropping like heavy stones into the quiet room. Family protects each other. Family supports each other. And family certainly does not commit federal wire fraud against their own blood just to fund a fake luxurious lifestyle. Brittany, who had been staring at her broken phone on the floor, suddenly shrieked, "You are a monster, Naomi! You have all this money and you are just going to stand there and watch your own parents lose their house. You are going to let my credit get ruined. You are a selfish, cold-hearted monster." I turned my freezing gaze toward my sister. "My credit was perfectly fine until you stole it, Brittany," I replied smoothly. "You wanted to play the role of a wealthy, successful lawyer. Now you get to face the legal consequences of actually pretending to be one. You leased a Porsche with stolen funds. You committed identity theft. You and our parents built a massive criminal enterprise, and you actually thought I would just smile and pay the bill when the time came." Harrison stepped forward, trying to pull Cynthia up from the floor. He glared at me with pure venomous hatred, realizing that his intimidation and his wife's crying had completely failed to crack my armor. Fine, Harrison spat, his face twisting into an ugly sneer. If you will not sign the consent form, we will just leave. We will declare bankruptcy. You can try to sue us for the money, but you cannot get blood from a stone. We have nothing left for you to take. We are walking out of here right now, and you will never see us again. He aggressively grabbed Cynthia's arm and pulled her toward the heavy oak doors of the private dining room. Brittany scrambled to her feet, grabbing her designer purse and preparing to flee the scene of their crimes. They honestly believed they could just walk away from the wreckage they had caused. They thought the absolute worst consequence they faced was me simply refusing to pay their bills. They were so incredibly wrong. The trap had not even fully snapped shut yet. I stood perfectly still next to Leo and Kendra, waiting for the ultimate crescendo of this entire operation. Harrison had his hand firmly on the brass handle of the heavy oak door. He was entirely convinced he had just won the standoff by simply retreating. Brittany paused right behind him, unwilling to leave without securing the last word. She could not resist twisting the knife one final time. She spun around to face me, clutching her expensive designer purse. Her face was a mask of ugly, arrogant defiance. "You cannot prove a single thing, Naomi!" Brittany screamed, her shrill voice echoing off the high wood-paneled ceiling. "It is your word against ours. Good luck finding a judge who will believe a bitter dropout over a loving, respectable family. We are untouchable and you are just a pathetic liar." I did not raise my voice. I did not move a single inch toward her. I simply lifted my wrist and calmly checked the face of my silver designer watch. The second hand ticked precisely into place. I looked back up at and smiled a smile so completely devoid of warmth it could freeze boiling water. "I do not have to prove anything to you, Brittany," I said softly. "You can explain it to them." Before she could even process my words, the heavy oak doors of the private dining room burst completely open. The sudden brutal force of the breach sent Harrison stumbling violently backward into the wall. Special Agent Thompson strode into the room holding his gold federal badge high in the air. He was immediately followed by a flood of plainclothes federal agents and several fully uniformed local police officers. The sudden influx of law enforcement completely overwhelmed the intimate dining space. The sharp crackle of police radios and the heavy stomp of tactical boots instantly shattered my parents' carefully curated illusion of high society elegance. Outside the large bay windows facing the bustling downtown street, a chaotic kaleidoscope of brilliant red and blue police lights suddenly ignited. The flashing strobe effects cut fiercely through the expensive dim lighting of the restaurant, illuminating the sheer horror on my parents' faces in harsh alternating colors. Harrison, Cynthia, and Brittany Williams. Agent Thompson announced, his commanding voice leaving absolutely zero room for negotiation. "You are all under arrest for aggravated identity theft, federal wire fraud, and criminal conspiracy." Brittany dropped her designer purse. It hit the floor, spilling expensive makeup and credit cards across the wet, damaged hardwood. She let out a guttural, piercing shriek as a female federal agent grabbed her arms and spun her forcefully around. The sharp metallic click of the heavy steel handcuffs snapping tightly shut around her wrists sounded like absolute music to my ears. "Get your hands off me!" Brittany sobbed hysterically, kicking her high heels against the floor. "Do you know who I am? I am a lawyer. You are ruining my career. I am going to be a partner." "You do not even have a law license, miss," the arresting agent stated, flatly tightening the cuffs. "You have the right to remain silent. I highly suggest you use it." Cynthia collapsed completely. She fell back against the edge of the dining table, knocking over the remaining wine glasses. She wailed loudly, her perfectly styled hair falling in messy clumps around her face. Her mascara ran down her cheeks in thick, dark rivers, completely ruining her expensive country club aesthetic. She reached out toward me, her hands shaking violently. "Naomi, please tell them to stop!" Cynthia begged, her voice cracking into a pathetic squeak. "We are your family. You are destroying our reputation. What will our friends think? Please call them off." I stood exactly where I was, my posture perfectly straight. "Your reputation was a lie, Cynthia," I replied, my voice completely flat. "Now the world gets to see exactly who you really are." realizing that I would not save them. Harrison decided to play his final desperate card. He clutched his chest, dramatically gasping for air with exaggerated wide eyes. He dropped heavily to his knees, gripping the fabric of his expensive suit right over his heart. My heart. Harrison wheezed, looking frantically at the police officers. I am having a heart attack. I need an ambulance immediately. You are killing me. He genuinely thought he could manipulate a federal task force with a fake medical emergency. He thought he could buy himself time and force the officers to treat him like a fragile victim. But I had explicitly warned Special Agent Thompson about their extreme narcissistic tendencies. I had told him they would try absolutely anything to escape accountability. Agent Thompson simply rolled his eyes and tapped his shoulder radio. Bring in the medics, he ordered calmly. We have a suspected cardiac event. Less than 10 seconds later, two fully equipped paramedics rushed through the open doors. They had been stationed in the restaurant lobby explicitly for this exact scenario. They immediately dropped their gear bags next to Harrison and attached a portable electrocardiogram monitor to his chest. The entire room fell silent except for the frantic sobbing of my mother and sister. The paramedics watched the digital monitor for a few brief seconds before exchanging a highly annoyed look. His heart rhythm is perfectly normal, the lead paramedic announced, standing up and packing away his equipment. His blood pressure is slightly elevated due to stress, but there is absolutely zero indication of a cardiac event. He is completely fine to be transported. The sheer profound embarrassment of being medically cleared as a faker in front of federal agents completely broke my father. Two uniformed police officers immediately grabbed him by the arms and hauled him roughly to his feet. They slammed him against the wall and forcefully ratcheted a pair of handcuffs around his wrists. The illusion of the powerful, wealthy patriarch was completely decimated. He was just a common criminal caught red-handed. Agent Thompson finished reciting the Miranda rights to the sobbing trio. Move them out, he commanded, gesturing toward the hallway. This was the absolute crescendo of my entire master plan. They were not being quietly escorted out the back door in the middle of the night. Because of the layout of the upscale steakhouse, the officers had to march them directly through the main dining room. The restaurant was completely packed with the city's elite. Wealthy business owners, local politicians, and high society socialites were all sitting at their tables eating expensive dinners. I walked out of the private room and stood in the hallway, flanked securely by Leo and Kendra. We watched as the police physically paraded my toxic family through the crowded establishment. Every single patron in the restaurant stopped eating. Forks were lowered. Conversations died instantly. Hundreds of pairs of judging elite eyes locked directly onto Harrison, Cynthia, and Brittany. People pulled out their smartphones, recording the spectacular downfall of the Williams family. The very society they had worshipped, the people they had committed massive federal fraud to impress, were now watching them being frog-marched out the front doors in shiny silver handcuffs. Brittany tried to hide her tear-stained face behind her hair, but it was useless. Cynthia kept her head down, weeping loudly, as the flashing police lights from the street bathed her in a harsh red glow. Harrison stumbled along, looking completely hollowed out, his fake pride entirely stripped away by the crushing weight of public humiliation. I stood tall beside my brother. Leo reached out and grabbed my hand, holding it tightly. His mechanic calluses pressed against my skin, grounding me in the reality of what we had just survived. Kendra wrapped her arm around Leo's waist, resting her head on his shoulder. They were safe now. The oppressive shadow my parents had cast over our entire lives was permanently lifted. We watched the heavy glass doors of the steakhouse swing shut behind the police escort. The flashing lights outside surged brilliantly before the unmarked vehicles finally pulled away from the curb, merging into the busy downtown traffic. The trash had officially taken itself out. My empire was perfectly secure, and the real family I had chosen was standing right beside me, ready to start a brand new life. 6 months have passed since that spectacular night at the upscale steakhouse. The heavy grinding wheels of the federal justice system do not care about suburban social status or country club appearances. They care about hard evidence, and my financial attorney ensured they had absolute mountains of it. The fallout was total and completely unforgiving. Brittany realized very quickly that her fake lawyer persona would not save her from a seasoned federal prosecutor. Facing undeniable digital evidence and the real threat of a 20-year maximum sentence, my golden sister finally cracked. She took a plea deal. She publicly pled guilty to aggravated identity theft and federal wire fraud. She is currently serving a mandatory 4-year sentence in a minimum security federal prison. There are no luxury yachts or designer handbags in her cell block, just a harsh uniform and the devastating reality of her ruined life. She will forever carry a federal felony on her record, completely obliterating any delusional fantasy she ever held of working in a legitimate law firm. My parents, Harrison and Cynthia, suffered a fate that in their shallow minds is practically worse than prison. They managed to avoid serving active jail time by cooperating with the authorities and pinning the majority of the direct spending on Brittany, but their financial destruction was absolute. To afford the exorbitant retainer fees for their criminal defense lawyers, they were forced to completely liquidate what little equity they had left. The bank aggressively foreclosed on their pristine colonial house in the suburbs. Their luxury cars were repossessed. The country club revoked their membership immediately following the highly publicized arrest. Today, they live in a cramped, dilapidated trailer park on the far outskirts of the city. They are entirely bankrupt, stripped of their wealth, their fake prestige, and their golden child. They have nothing left but each other, and the bitter, agonizing memory of the empire they destroyed with their own greed. I have not spoken a single word to them since I watched the police cars drive away from the restaurant. The legal agreements they signed in my lawyer's office are completely ironclad. They are permanently erased from my world. The contrast between their dark, chaotic downfall and my current reality is nothing short of beautiful. Right now, I am sitting comfortably in a plush patio chair, basking in the warm, golden sunlight of a perfect weekend afternoon. I am looking out over the massive, perfectly manicured green lawn of the $450,000 house I purchased. But this is not my house. This is Leo's sanctuary. The air smells wonderfully of roasting charcoal and blooming jasmine. A few yards away, my brother Leo is standing at a large stainless steel grill, expertly flipping burgers. He looks completely transformed. The heavy dark circles that used to haunt his eyes are entirely gone. He is no longer wearing grease-stained mechanic uniforms or operating on 3 hours of sleep. After moving into the house and being freed from the crushing weight of sheer survival, Leo finally had the mental space to breathe. He leveraged his hard-earned dual degree and accepted a fantastic corporate management position at a highly respected logistics firm downtown. He looks rested, confident, and deeply, profoundly happy. The sliding glass door opens behind me, and Kendra steps out onto the wooden deck. She is wearing a flowing summer dress and a bright, radiant smile. Her beautiful dark skin glows perfectly in the afternoon sun. She walks over to me carrying 2 tall glasses of cold iced tea filled to the brim with fresh lemon slices and mint. As she hands me a glass, I look down at the prominent, beautiful curve of her growing stomach. She is 6 months pregnant with their first child. My niece or nephew will be born into a life of absolute safety, surrounded by impenetrable security and unconditional support. They will never know the cold, toxic manipulation that Leo and I endured. They will grow up running barefoot across this massive green lawn, completely insulated from the financial abuse and the emotional starvation of our past. I take a slow, refreshing sip of the cold, sweet tea and lean back against the comfortable cushions. I watch Kendra wrap her arms around Leo's waist from behind, resting her chin on his broad shoulder as he laughs at a joke she makes. I feel the profound, overwhelming sense of peace settle permanently into my bones. The dark, heavy shadows of my youth are entirely banished. For 34 years, I believed the lie that I was fundamentally broken because the people who created me refused to value my existence. I thought that family meant enduring endless cruelty just to keep a seat at a table where I was completely unwanted. But looking at my brother and his fierce, brilliant wife, I finally understand the absolute truth. Blood does not make a family. Blood is just a biological coincidence. True family is built on a foundation of unbreakable loyalty, deep mutual respect, and genuine unconditional love. My parents and my sister were nothing but toxic parasites draining my energy and attempting to steal my future. Cutting them off was not an act of vengeance, it was the ultimate act of self-preservation. I aggressively cut off the dead weight, and by doing so, I managed to save the only family members who were actually worth keeping. The wealth I built through years of brutal, relentless hard work was never meant to be a ransom payment to buy my parents' affection. It was always meant to be a shield. It was a tool to build a fortress for the people who truly matter. I won the absolute hardest battle of my life by simply recognizing my own immense value and fiercely protecting the ones I love. Sometimes the best way to deal with toxic family members is to hand them the shovel and let them dig their own graves. Have you ever discovered a family member using your name or money behind your back? Tell me your story in the comments. Do not forget to like, subscribe, and always check your credit score.